Well, today our sermon is going to be on the screen. I've got a video that was provided by LICC, who produced the materials for this series, and it was a godsend because it meant that I could have a day off this week, and if I'd had to prepare a sermon I wouldn't have had a day off. So that has been really helpful. And even though it's a video, there is some personal connection, and I will explain about that in a few moments when we get to it. We're starting Advent. We've talked a little bit about that already. And this new series is just going to happen over the next few weeks. And then we'll come back to the series that we'd begun, the Church of Tomorrow. So we're going to pick that up in the new year. Advent. Sorry, see? This is from All Day Yesterday saying, free hot chocolate. So, Advent is the season of preparation as we wait for Christmas Day and we wait for the celebration of the birth of Jesus. And that means only 24 sleeps till Christmas. Do we still count it like that, or are we too old for that? Too long in the tooth. From what we hear earlier, some of you are well into it, well into being ready for Christmas, but some go even earlier, don't they? So some might start their Christmas shopping in August. Some really organised people even start in the January sales, don't they, for the following Christmas. Some people would prefer not to have any Christmas focus until Christmas Eve, and they leave everything till the very last possible minute. Whether you've started or not, today is a great moment to just start preparing spiritually for what is to come. And so we're beginning with this series, an Advent series, Down to Earth, and the journey that's accompanying it with the daily readings. And so there's two elements. First, that we're going to be looking at. First is that we have a God who has come down to earth. A God who is still, in so many ways, down to earth, and who has involved himself in the everyday mess and the beauty as well of daily life. The second sort of focus of it is that our down-to-earth God has a down-to-earth mission for each one of us that he calls us to. And we are called in some ways, like him, to be down-to-earth people. Heavenly minded, but also down to earth. And as we prepare for this season between us, we will have all sorts of Christmas traditions, and those will vary from house to house, from family to family. Some will be usual, some will be unusual traditions. I had a few examples. So apparently in Japan, don't know if you knew this, it's become tradition for many to take a trip to KFC, that is Kentucky Fried Chicken, on Christmas Day. And people pre-order weeks in advance to make sure that they can get their KFC for Christmas Day. In Sweden, some people celebrate with the Yule goat. Yule goat? Ever heard of that? It's a bit strange, isn't it? And on a related theme, apparently in Romania, it is a Christmas tradition for men to dress up as goats. So there might be a new tradition there that you think, hey, that would really fit with what we do as a family this year. I will leave that to you. Our sermon today, the personal connection, is that when I looked at the video, it's an old friend of mine. So it's a guy called Steve. I was in the same group with him when I went to college. And in fact, Steve and his wife, when Nikki and I first got married, we were in a house in South Norwood with flats in it. And Steve and Lisa were in the flat directly above us. So we're going to come and we're going to hear what Steve has to share with us via video this morning. And then I will read I'm going to read from the Bible first, and then we're going to show what he has. So this is the passage for today, all right? So this is from John 1, verses 1 to 14. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Let's watch this video.
What's one of your favorite Christmas traditions? I love a Christmas cracker. Whether you go cheap or expensive, the reality is that the contents don't last much longer than the dinner. The crown tears, the gift is useless, and the joke usually bombs. But here's the clever thing. The humble Christmas cracker contains the heart of the Christmas story. A king's crown, a gift, and a little message. Christmas is about a king who comes to bring us gifts of hope and peace and love, and a message that the angel says will be good news for everyone. When John opens his gospel, he introduces us to the newborn king as the king of the cosmos. The Message version says, "The Word became flesh and moved into our neighborhood." This king is an unusual king. This king takes on flesh. He becomes one of us. The significance of this is captured in the crown. Usually, kings wear crowns made of gold and precious jewels. The crown that King Charles wore at his coronation is said to be worth £400 million. Jesus, the unusual king, will wear a crown made of thorns that wasn't worth anything, but costs him everything. If you want to know what God is like, look hard at Jesus. The Apostle Paul tells us in Philippians 2:7 that he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. This unusual king is a humble king. Now today we might admire humility, but that wasn't necessarily the case in Jesus' day, which makes this even more unusual. Historians will tell you that in the ancient world, humility was not considered a virtue. What was prized was honor, having your qualities recognized and your name praised. To boast about your achievements was not just culturally acceptable, it was expected in the Greco-Roman world. This is changed with the unusual king who submitted himself to the most humiliating punishment the Romans could create: crucifixion. That included a crown of twisted thorns being placed on his head, with a mocking sign reading, "The King of the Jews." Jesus emptied himself of his divine status and died for the sake of the world that he loved. Could it be that this humble, unusual act of a king is the path to a revolution that the world needs today? To empty ourselves of our self-importance and lay your lives down for the sake of others. And this unusual king moves into our neighborhood. It's hard to imagine a king moving into our neighbourhood. When royalty visits a neighbourhood to open a new supermarket or a care home, the council will often spend weeks tidying up the streets, landscaping the parks, painting over the graffiti. It has been said that so many places visited by royalty smell of paint. Parents even sometimes use the possibility of a royal visit as a tool to discipline their children. Mum might say, imagine if the king or the queen was coming to visit. Would you be happy that they saw your bedroom looking like that? Usually kings live in palaces. This unusual king was born in a town that had to be defined so as not to be confused with other Bethlehems in the area. He lived most of his life in a builder's house, working in his father's workshop. This unusual king subjected himself to the distresses and disasters of our everyday lives. He chose to live in the same world as us and experience the same daily demands and pressures of life in our village, in our town, or in our city. The one who has lived among the angels now lived among even the ones who didn't recognize or accept him. The word for dwell in the Greek is the word tent. In Jesus, God pitched his tent among us. The Jews had hoped for a king and a huge temple, strong to the elements, invincible to invading powers. But God became human and pitched his tent among them in flesh and poured out his life for the sake of us.
Power is social currency. Those who have this seemingly finite resource are often the last to give it up, resulting in more for them and less for us. This skewed perspective creates a frenzy in which survival of the fittest kicks into gear. And I suppose this would be appropriate if we all had access to the same resources, but we don't. At its core, a thirst for power is fueled by insecurity. Perhaps this is why we struggle to trust our leaders. Could it be that their insatiable thirst for power and their hunger for more is a result of insecurity rearing its head? It is difficult to entrust oneself to leadership these days. In many ways, the true character of a leader is determined by their relationship with power. This narrows the playing field regarding who is and isn't a good leader. To narrow the playing field even further, few leaders have taught to love one's enemies. Even fewer have taught that it is better to give than it is to receive, to repay evil with good, and to serve sacrificially for the common good. As beautiful as these principles are, they serve as mere platitudes if understood simply as moral guidance. However, if understood within the context of who it was who said and did these things, the playing field is narrowed down to one player, one leader. If this leader were a football manager, he wouldn't just simply bark instructions from the touchline. He'd immerse himself into the game, braving the cold of December nights in hostile stadiums, enduring grueling tackles from vengeful opposition, leaving his sweat and tears, but most importantly, his blood on the pitch. This leader isn't a sporting coach. This leader is our king, the king who becomes one of us. This unusual king is Jesus.
This is our unusual king. No crown of jewels, but a crown of thorns. No palace, but a regular neighborhood. A king who leaves his sweat and blood on the pitch. And we're called to live out the life of this king in our neighborhoods, to live among the lonely and the lost, and like Jesus, to be a light of hope to them. Excuse the pun, but this message is crackers, but it's life-changing. A king who becomes one of us and moves into our neighborhoods. Now I could serve a king like that.
In the notes, LICC, who made that, produced a few things to reflect on as what this might mean for us. And I just want to encourage you to think about this, reflect on it, see what God might want to say to you through it. So I invite you, if you want to, you can close your eyes or just listen. But it says, why not join the revolution of this king today? What could it look like for you this week? Perhaps celebrating the accomplishments of our friends rather than our own. Perhaps withholding a judgmental response on X. It could mean fasting from selfies or the desire to be noticed. This is the way of the unusual king. And it says, perhaps some down-to-earth ways of making a difference could be write thank you cards to your bin men and delivery people or others on your front line unlikely to be thanked for what they do, or bless them with a generous gift. You could invite neighbours over for a Christmas movie night. You could bake and take some mince pies to your work colleagues or a neighbour you haven't met. As you prepare for Christmas, let your words become flesh. Turn your love into action and attempt something unusual to bless your friends and neighbours this Christmas. So there's a few things there to think about. There may be other things that God wants to just nudge you about and say, well, what about this? Is this something that you could do? But this story, it is an unusual story about an unusual king. And perhaps it means stepping out into doing something unusual ourselves to share something of what this is all about.